Here we go. Hi, LA Progressive friends and family and readers. Dick and I are really excited to have with us a real old friend, old as in we've known her for many years. And Marcy Winograd serves as the coordinator of Code Pink Congress and co-chair of the Peace in Ukraine Coalition. In 2020, Marcy was elected as a DNC delegate for Bernie Sanders. And Marcy's done a whole bunch of other stuff too, and she's going to share with us a little bit more about her bio. Welcome, Marcy.
Well, thank you, Sharon, and thank you, Dick, so much for welcoming me and for everything that you've done over the last decades to bring this news to the surface, to our audience, news we don't hear anywhere else, by and large. And so you have cultivated quite a coterie of writers on the left, and we appreciate that.
Yeah, we're so appreciative of people like you. So tell us a little bit more of your bio, because you've done a lot of stuff.
Yeah. Well, most recently, I've been coordinating the World Court Campaign at Code Pink. And what is that? Well, we may have heard about this case that South Africa brought against Israel at the International Court of Justice, accusing Israel of genocide in Gaza. So we decided at Code Pink that we really wanted to support South Africa in this effort. We think there are multiple levers of pressure that need to be activated. This is one of them, because it impacts the image of Israel throughout the world. And ultimately, I think more and more people will see that Israel is a pariah state. More and more people are recognizing that. So at our World Court Campaign, we have developed teams throughout the United States, but particularly in New York City, where we have the UN missions, in Washington, D.C., where we have the embassies, LA, San Francisco, Miami, Houston, some of the main cities, Chicago, where we have diplomatic missions that we can approach about cutting off arms, cutting off oil, cutting off tech to Israel. Though initially we started out in our request to these diplomatic missions, please support South Africa at the International Court of Justice. So that would mean introduce a declaration of intervention, almost like an amicus brief, a friend of the court brief. And so far, there are a few countries that have done that. And I just read that Turkey is now going to do that. That broke today. So that's good news. I am also involved, as you mentioned, Code Pink Congress. This is a bi-monthly program that I co-host with Medea Benjamin, the co-founder of Code Pink. We do this on Tuesdays, the first and third Tuesday of the month, 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern. Everybody's welcome to join us. You can sign up at codepink.org. It's codepink.org/Code Pink Congress. So you'll get all of the notifications. We have delved into, of course, the movement to liberate Palestine, the oppression and repression at home. We've talked about NATO and how this is not a force, a defensive force, but it's really an aggressive force, a NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. It should be North American, right? Because we're the primary funders of NATO. So we talked about that. We've looked at Cuba, the embargo. We've had a number of members of Congress on and grassroots activists, policy experts. So that's another area of focus. And of course, we have Code Pink Radio. We have a podcast. Maybe we can offer that at LA Progressive. Why not?
Yeah, we'd love that. We'd love that.
Let's do it. Let's do it. So that's produced by a different Code Pink activists each week, and I usually do it once a month. Most recently, I introduced Francis Boyle. He's a former prosecutor who brought a case on behalf of Bosnia before the World Court to our audience to talk about the current ICJ case. And we've had conversations with Eric Mann, who's very well known in LA circles on KPFK, about strategies and where is the hope for today. So I invite everybody to join us at codepink.org and tune in to Code Pink Radio.
So we enjoy working with Code Pink, and we'd love to work closer. We've republished a number of articles from Medea and others of the writers and you. And we would work on the radio or anything else. So a recent article, you take Congressman Ted Lieu to task. He represents a district that is near and dear to your heart. You lived there for a long time, Is that the district that you ran for Congress from some years ago?
Well,
And
that's a great question, Dick, because this district has been redistricted.
Right.
So in part, yes, and in part, no.
Right.
Ted Lieu represents a district that runs now from Torrance, which was in the district in which I ran in 2010, mobilized about, excuse me, 41% of the vote against an incumbent, Shane Harmon, who was very pro-Iraq war, Patriot Act, and so forth. So I did represent parts of that district. He also, his district, his current district runs up through West LA, Pacific Palisades, Santa Monica, and into Los Angeles. He actually has an office, his district office is in Los Angeles. So I've known Ted Lieu a long time, you know, and he started out, I think he was on the city council in Torrance, that's where he's based. And he then went on to the state assembly. And, you know, in many respects, he's like these, what we call them PEP lawmakers, progressive, except for Palestine, although that might be generous actually at this point. So Ted Lieu, then when he became a Congress member, he really focused on cozying up to the Israel lobby. And I can remember taking up a number of people active in Democratic clubs in Santa Monica and West LA to lobby him to support the Iran nuclear deal, the JCPOA. And as we were entering, who was exiting, but people who were pressing him to introduce support legislation to prohibit support for the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement. He never did support the Iran nuclear deal. He was one of the few in the Democratic Party, I think at the time, who didn't support it because he is so closely aligned with the Israel lobby. And when I say Israel lobby, it's really an umbrella at this point, right? It's Jewish Zionists, and it's also a lot of Christian fundamentalists who are Zionists. So Ted Lieu, I wrote about him recently because, as I mentioned, at Code Pink, we support South Africa and what South Africa is trying to do, which is basically uphold international law. Because what Israel is doing is a violation of the UN Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of Genocide, which says there's a legal definition for genocide. A lot of people are not aware of this, but this is part of the treaty that both Israel and the United States signed. And it says that genocide is when you commit a number of acts designed to destroy an ethnic, racial, national group in whole or in part, which is what Israel is doing with its constant bombardment, annihilation, maiming of over 100,000 Palestinians, denial of water, food, medicine, and on and on. So that's the legal definition. And South Africa, as I said, wants to uplift international law. Now, what has Ted Lieu done in this regard? Well, Ted Lieu should know, I'm sure he does know all about international law. Ted Lieu was a former military prosecutor. He's won awards for his legal skills. And now that he's in Congress, he voted in committee to push to the floor a bill that would punish South Africa for basically bringing this court case. And it would say that the bill says we need to review all of our US-South Africa trade relations, which amount to about $25 billion a year. Now, when I first read about this bill, I thought, oh, I'm not really going to pay attention to this. Where is it going to go? Who's following this? And the next thing I know, that this House committee has passed the bill to push it to the floor. It hasn't yet been voted on, however. And the Minister of Foreign Affairs for South Africa, Naledi Pandor, who was really one of the primary forces that was a catalyst for this lawsuit at the International Court of Justice, she's flying to Washington, D.C. Why? To meet with members of Congress, because she's very concerned. You know, there's an economic interest, and she doesn't want South Africa punished for upholding international law. So at that point, I thought, well, this is worth an article. And I wrote this article, Ted Lieu, depends on where you read it, but from DC to Israel, another $26 billion for slaughter. LA's Ted Lieu among the who's who in the complicit Democratic War Party. So that's the focus of that article. And, you know, it's not a surprise to me that Ted Lieu would do this because, as I mentioned, he opposed the Iran nuclear deal, and he has been he votes for almost every piece of legislation that I can think of in support of Israel and its settler colonial policies. He also introduced a bill. I don't think it went anywhere. I should look. But he introduced a bill a few years ago to for the United States to collaborate with Israel to develop what they call high energy directed weapons. And Dick, you probably know more about this than I do, but these weapons, some of them heat the molecules under your skin to paralyze protesters. That's what we're talking about. So at the time that I read about this, we had, I don't know, 50 to 100 people in his districts signing on to a letter to the House leadership saying, we don't want this and we don't support our representative doing this.
It's chilling to hear this. And for those people who are probably not going to even look up HR 7256, which is the piece of legislation that you're talking about, Marcy, I want to delve down a little bit deeper, because even though I have met Ted Lieu on more than one occasion, and I don't know him as, personally, but I doubt that he's an evil man. I, in my heart of hearts, believe that the root cause of these kinds of alignments have everything to do with campaign finance. How do you feel about that?
I agree. Yes, I think people are afraid. For Ted Lieu, it's beyond fear, I think. But so many lawmakers are afraid. They don't want to step out. They don't want to say anything. They don't want to be targeted in a campaign, in a primary campaign. They don't want to be canceled. And we know that AIPAC, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, has vowed to spend $100 million on defeating those who initially called for a ceasefire in Gaza, people like Cori Bush from Missouri. So there's real fear.
Yes.
I think lawmakers say, oh, it would be safe. I'll be safe. And I'll say that I'm aligned with J Street. But in the end, J Street is a cover for Israel's atrocities, I think.
That's right. I agree with you 100%. So what can we do as progressives? And the only thing that I know and to do is to keep doing what we're doing, but to encourage people to share, to subscribe to independent media, to follow Code Pink's podcast. And you originally posted this article that we're talking about right now in City Watch LA. City Watch LA is an independent outlet. We encourage people to share, to like, because that's the only ammunition we have against these very, very deep-pocketed organizations and enterprises like AIPAC.
I couldn't agree with you more. And we also have to energize and mobilize the constituents in these House districts to become more engaged, to stay on top of what their representative is doing. Because we know right now in the United States, there's overwhelming support for a ceasefire. People don't want to see this continue in Gaza, this genocide. I'm going to call it genocide. That's what it is. And yet there were only 2 House representatives from the LA area who voted no on the recent bill to fund Israel's slaughter to the tune of another $26 billion. What an outrage, while we're watching the leveling of every university in Gaza in a crime that is called scholasticide, to erase the wisdom and knowledge of a people.
Yeah.
We're seeing.
Who are those two?
Okay, so the 2 in the LA area who dissented, who voted no, Judy Chu, and also Maxine Waters.
Ah.
Okay.
So along these lines, in kind of a larger scale, and coming off last night when there was a battle royale at UCLA and battle elsewhere that are really setting some progressives against other progressives against centrists. And you say that, many people in the United States favor a ceasefire, except if you watch the mainstream media and you listen to it, it's kind of a different story. It's all about defending Israel right up and down the line on even what passed for liberal television stations.
Yeah, I have friends and relatives who are glued to MSNBC. And I just tell them I don't watch that trash. because on MSNBC, it's almost 24/7 anti-Trump. I'm no Trump fan. Would never vote for that guy. But right now, we have to look at who's in power right now and what is he doing? President Biden is funding and arming a genocide.
Right.
We got to call that out, right? And if we're afraid to call that out because somebody else might be worse, then what we're doing really is laying the groundwork for the next person to be worse.
Right.
Absolutely.
And currently we're vilifying the students who are called pro-Palestinian. I would say maybe they're pro-peace, but smearing them all as anti-Semites and activists and outside agitators coming into campus, and same old tricks that went on in the Vietnam War protests, vilifying the opponents and not really and driving those potential supporters of Joe Biden, if he made some changes, driving them away completely, I would say, and in service of reelecting Donald Trump.
Exactly. And I just want to add, people are on board on corporate media to vilify the students, and yet why do we have a president who's and a Congress fully on board for billions of dollars more for this genocide, when if we were to stop the flow of arms and say we need a ceasefire and we're not going to build a pier and we're not going to send 1,000 US soldiers over to oversee the building of this pier to allow aid in, when aid is at the border in trucks after trucks after trucks, if we were to say that, maybe there would not be these protests erupting at over 100, maybe 200 college campuses, right, throughout the nation. And yet, what I heard yesterday, I couldn't believe it. I was over at a friend's house and I walked in and she said, I just heard on the news that it's outside agitators who are responsible for these demonstrations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Well, that's what they want you to believe.
That's right.
Yeah.
So for the people who live in Ted Lieu's congressional district, what would you encourage them to do?
I would encourage them to show up at the district office, bring friends, say that you want a meeting with Ted Lieu on the phone right away, find out when he's going to be in district, but even if he's not, say you want to meet with the chief of staff and you want Ted Lieu on the phone, and don't leave until you get him. Host a town hall with an empty seat if he won't appear. I think clearly he hasn't felt enough pressure, right? For him to be so bold as to completely ignore the wishes of his constituents, to curry favor, to continually curry favor with the Israel lobby, is such an insult, right? Who is he working for? Come on.
Yeah.
And like you said, he's not an evil person, and yet he is still so subservient to this lobby that it makes one wonder, what are your motivations?
Wow. Well, Marcy, it's really been a pleasure talking to you, and thank you for putting a spotlight on this issue. And we want to say here to Congressional Representative Judy Chu and Auntie Maxine Waters, who has just been a lioness on these issues. So thank you, Marcy, for joining us, and we want you to come back.
I would love to come back. Yeah, I'll take you up on that.
Awesome.
And thank you again for all that you do for Los Angeles and beyond, far beyond, globally, to bring us the real news. We need it. Thank you.
Thanks, Marcy.
Thank you for sticking around. If you like the LA Progressive content and the discussions we have here, please consider clicking the subscribe button below, and also give us a thumbs up. That helps to grow our audience by feeding the algorithm, which helps to get this content in front of more eyes. Thanks for stopping by. We really appreciate your support.